Jang Woo-Jin's hands were steady, but his heart was cold as he rewound the surveillance feed for the fourth time that night. The glowing digital clock on his desk flickered to 2:15 a.m. in the oppressive silence of the Blue Room, his private security hub. The walls seemed to pulse with the hum of high-tech machinery. On the wall of monitors, the grain of the night vision footage smoothed over the features of Zuri Daniel, the American nurse he had hired 6 weeks ago. There she was again, moving with a silent, rhythmic grace toward his mother's private suite. In the eerie green glow of the cameras, her every gesture looked like a calculated strike. Woo-Jin had lived his life by a single rule: trust is a luxury for the dead. Between the missing heirloom ring, the rumors of a plant inside the mansion, and the confidential file he'd seen her hiding, everything pointed to one conclusion. This woman wasn't just a caregiver. She was a predator, using his paralyzed mother as a Trojan horse to infiltrate the Jang syndicate. Woo-Jin had built a multi-million-dollar empire on his ability to read a person's soul through a screen. But as he watched Zuri disappear into the shadows of his mother's room, his chest tightened with a sensation he hadn't felt in years. He leaned forward, the cold blue light of the monitors catching the sharp edge of his jaw and the glint of a tear he didn't even realize had fallen. This was it. The proof. His finger hovered over the silent alarm that would summon his elite security team. One command and Zuri Daniel would be erased, not killed. He wasn't a savage, but vanished. Scrubbed from Seoul's records and sent back to America with a warning that would haunt her for life. But something stayed his hand. The camera inside the sunroom flickered, switching to a high-definition feed. There sat Soon-hee, 72 years old, her body frozen by a stroke but her eyes wide with a terrifying, silent panic. She was trapped in the prison of her own skin, a single tear rolling down her weathered face as she struggled to breathe. And then, Zuri entered the frame. What Woo-Jin saw next made his breath hitch in his throat, his hand covering his mouth in pure disbelief. Before we reveal the miracle Jang Woo-Jin discovered on those screens, I have to ask you something. Have you ever been so convinced someone was your enemy that you missed the moment they became your only hope? Have you ever had your entire world shattered by a truth you were too blind to see? Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts. And if you're ready to see the secret Woo-Jin found inside that confidential file, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is going to challenge everything you think you know about power, loyalty, and the strength of a silent heart. Now, let's go back to where this all started. 6 weeks ago, at Incheon International Airport. The humid air of Seoul felt like a physical weight as Zuri Daniel stepped through the sliding doors of Incheon International Airport. In her grip, she clutched a single worn suitcase and a folder containing her nursing credentials, her only tickets out of the crushing debt back in Atlanta. She didn't come for the sights or the culture. She came for the salary that no American hospital would offer a nurse with only 3 years of experience. Her father's medical bills were a mountain she couldn't climb alone, and the Jang family had offered her a lifeline that felt more like a golden shackle. Waiting for her was a man in a charcoal suit, his face as expressionless as a stone carving. He didn't offer a greeting, only a sharp nod before ushering her into the back of a black sedan with tinted windows so dark the city outside turned to a blur of gray. As they wove through the neon-lit arteries of the city, Zuri felt a creeping chill. She had researched her employer, of course. Jang Woo-Jin was listed as a venture capitalist, but the way the traffic seemed to part for their car and the way the driver kept his hand near his hip told a different story. The sedan eventually turned into a secluded drive, winding upward until a massive fortress of glass and slate loomed over the cliffside. This was the Jang Mansion, a masterpiece of modern architecture that felt more like a high-security prison than a home. At the gate, 3 men with earpieces scanned the car with the cold efficiency of soldiers. When the doors finally opened, Zuri was met with the striking silence of the foyer. The floors were polished black marble, reflecting the dim, recessed lighting above. Standing at the top of a wide staircase was Jang Woo-Jin. He looked exactly like the man she'd seen on the monitors in the dead of night, sharp, expensive, and utterly unreachable. His suit was tailored to perfection, but his eyes were what froze her in place. They weren't welcoming. They were dissecting her, looking for a weakness. Miss Daniel, he said, his voice a low, melodic rasp that echoed in the empty hall. You are here because you are the best. My mother requires a specific kind of care. Understand that in this house, my word is the only law. You will have everything you need to perform your duties, but you will provide nothing more and nothing less than what is requested. Zuri swallowed the lump in her throat, standing tall despite the exhaustion rattling her bones. I'm here to help your mother walk and speak again, Mr. Jang. That is my only mission. He didn't blink. He simply turned, his silhouette cutting a jagged line against the blue-tinted windows. We shall see. Follow me. As she walked deeper into the heart of the fortress, Zuri felt the invisible eyes of the house on her. She didn't know about the blue room yet, or the cameras tucked into every crown molding, but she knew one thing. She had just stepped into a world where a single mistake wouldn't just cost her a job, it could cost her everything. The heavy oak door to Soon-hee's suite creaked open, admitting a sliver of the mansion's sterile, blue-tinted light. Woo-Jin stood at the threshold, his presence filling the room with an unspoken command for silence. He didn't look at his mother immediately. His gaze was fixed on Zuri, who was already adjusting the height of the specialized medical bed. Without a word, he pulled a thin, black leather-bound ledger from his jacket and dropped it onto the side table. The absolute rules, Woo-Jin stated, his voice dropping to a dangerous, velvety low. Read them, memorize them. In this house, my mother's privacy is a sanctum, and your compliance is the only thing keeping you on the payroll. You do not speak to the staff. You do not leave the East Wing after sunset. And you never, under any circumstances, question the security protocols. Zuri didn't flinch. She didn't even look at the book. Instead, her eyes were fixed on Soon-hee, who sat slumped in her wheelchair, her head tilted at an angle that looked both painful and restrictive to her breathing. The elderly woman's eyes were glassy, staring at nothing, a thin plaid blanket sliding off her lap. Mr. Jang, Zuri said, her voice a calm, resonant contrast to his sharp edges. She stepped toward the wheelchair, ignoring the man who stood like a silent judge behind her. Rules are for people who aren't busy living. Your mother's cervical spine is compressed because of this chair's alignment. If we don't fix her posture, she won't just be paralyzed, she'll be suffocating. Woo-Jin's jaw tightened. I didn't hire you for your medical opinions on furniture. I hired you to follow orders. Zuri moved with a focused, gentle grace that seemed to defy the tension in the room. She leaned forward, her deep brown skin glowing under the warm amber lamp she had switched on to counteract the house's coldness. With practiced, tender hands, she reached behind Soon-hee's neck. She didn't just move her, she spoke to her, a soft murmur that was meant only for the woman who everyone else treated like a statue. There we go, Mama Soon-hee, Zuri whispered, gently lifting the woman's chin and shifting her shoulders back. Deep breaths now, let the air in. As Soon-hee's posture straightened, a tiny, ragged gasp escaped her lips, the first deep breath she'd taken in hours. The elderly woman's eyes flickered, momentarily finding Zuri's face, and for a heartbeat, the weariness in her expression softened into a flicker of trust. Woo-Jin watched from the shadows, his hand instinctively going to the document in his pocket. He had expected fear. He had expected a subordinate who would bow to his shadow. Instead, he saw a woman who looked at his mother not as a patient or a burden, but as a person. The intimidation he had planned died in his throat, replaced by a surge of suspicious curiosity. Zuri stood back, finally meeting his gaze with a focused, professional fire. The rules are on the table, Mr. Jang, she said softly, adjusting the plaid blanket. But the patient is in the chair. I suggest we focus on the one that can still feel. Was this genuine compassion, or the most sophisticated act he had ever seen? Woo-Jin turned on his heel, leaving without a word, but as the door closed, he headed straight for the blue room. He needed to see what she did when she thought no one was watching. How do you think Woo-Jin's mother will react as Zuri continues to push the boundaries of the absolute rules to provide her care? The blue room was a sanctuary of cold, flickering glass, tucked away behind a seamless wall in Woo-Jin's private study. Inside, the air was chilled to protect the humming servers, and the only light came from the grid of high-definition monitors that stretched across the wall. With a flick of his wrist, Woo-Jin activated the new feed. the sunroom. He had personally overseen the installation of the pinhole cameras, hidden within the ornate crown molding and the leafy depths of the potted palms. He wanted no blind spots. If Zuri Daniel was a spy, if she was rifling through drawers or whispering into a hidden transmitter, he would see it in 8K resolution. He settled into his leather chair, the cool blue light reflecting in his narrowed eyes. On the screen, the sunroom was bathed in a deceptive, honey-colored warmth. Zuri was there, her navy uniform crisp against the soft beige of the furniture. She was alone with Soon-hee. Woo-Jin leaned forward, his thumb tracing the sharp line of his jaw. He expected to see her relax her mask. He expected the gentle expression to fade into boredom or, better yet, the calculating look of an infiltrator. Hours bled into one another. Woo-Jin watched, skipping through the time-stamped footage with restless energy. But the slip-up he craved never came. Instead, he saw a level of devotion that felt alien to the world he inhabited. He watched Zuri spend 45 minutes patiently massaging his mother's rigid fingers, her lips moving in a silent, soothing monologue that the microphones barely caught. He saw her carefully heat a bowl of porridge, testing the temperature on her own wrist with a focused intensity before offering the first spoonful. At one point, Soon-hee had a sudden, violent muscle spasm, her body jerking against the constraints of the wheelchair. Woo-Jin reached for the intercom, his muscles tensing to call security, but he stopped. On the screen, Zuri didn't panic. She didn't call for help. She moved with the fluid precision of a dancer, stepping into his mother's personal space and wrapping her arms around the older woman in a firm, grounding embrace. She held her through the tremors, resting her forehead against Soon-hee's gray hair, whispering until the shaking subsided. Woo-Jin felt a strange, uncomfortable heat rising in his chest. He was looking for a traitor, but all he found was a woman who seemed to be giving his mother the very thing he had long ago forgotten how to offer: genuine touch. He watched her wipe a stray drop of soup from his mother's chin with a tenderness that felt more intimate than any secret document. As the sun began to set on the screen, casting long, dramatic shadows across the sunroom, Zuri didn't stop. She began a series of soft stretches, her movements slow and deliberate, designed to keep his mother's joints from seizing. Woo-Jin sat in the dark of the blue room, the confidential file on his lap still unopened. He had intended to catch a criminal, but as he watched Zuri lean down to kiss his mother's hand before the night shift began, he realized he was the one who couldn't look away. He wasn't just watching a caregiver anymore, he was watching a mystery he couldn't solve. The tension in the Jang mansion reached a breaking point 3 days later, heralded by the sharp, rhythmic clicking of heels on the marble floors. It was Mio, Woo-Jin's sister, whose voice cut through the afternoon quiet like a serrated blade. A family heirloom, a heavy emerald-encrusted ring that had belonged to their grandmother, was gone from Soon-hee's bedside vanity. Within minutes, the East Wing was swarming with Woo-Jin's subordinates, men with cold eyes and broad shoulders who stood like pillars of shadow in the hallway. Mio stood in the center of the sunroom, her finger pointed directly at Zuri. "She's the only one with access. My mother can't move, let alone misplace a ring of that value. Admit it, nurse, you thought a little piece of our history would pay for your father's debts back in the States." Zuri stood her ground, her hands folded neatly in front of her navy uniform. Her expression remained soft, but her eyes held a steady, unwavering fire. She didn't offer a frantic defense or a tearful plea. She simply looked at Woo-Jin, who stood at the edge of the room, his face an unreadable mask of fair skin and sharp angles. "Search her room," Mio barked at the guards. "Search her bags. She's been here 6 weeks, plenty of time to find a hiding spot." Woo-Jin raised a hand, a gesture that instantly silenced his sister and halted the men. He didn't look at Zuri. Without a word, he turned and retreated toward the blue room, the heavy door thudding shut behind him. He pulled up the footage from the previous night, his heart hammering against his ribs in a rhythm he didn't care to analyze. He scrolled through the hours of grainy, low-light footage until he found the moment. At 1:14 a.m., the screen showed Soon-hee agitating in her sleep. Her hand had brushed against the vanity, knocking the ring onto the thick, plush rug. Because of her limited mobility, the movement was awkward, and the ring rolled into the deep shadows beneath the radiator. An hour later, Zuri entered the frame for a routine check. She paused, her eyes scanning the floor. She knelt, her deep brown skin catching the dim amber glow of the nightlight, and reached under the metal fins of the radiator. When she pulled her hand back, the emerald sparkled in her palm. Woo-Jin leaned closer to the monitor, expecting to see her slip it into her pocket. Instead, he watched as she walked to the bed. She didn't wake the sleeping woman. Instead, she gently took Soon-hee's frail, wrinkled hand and slid the ring back onto her finger, curling the older woman's hand into a protective fist. Zuri leaned down, her lips brushing against Soon-hee's ear. "You dropped your treasure, Mama," Zuri whispered on the audio feed, her voice thick with a maternal warmth that made Woo-Jin's throat tighten. "Don't let them tell you that you're losing your mind. It was just an accident. I've got you." Woo-Jin sat back in the cool blue light, the confidential file on his desk feeling heavier than ever. He had expected to see a thief caught in the act. Instead, he had witnessed a secret act of dignity. He realized then that the only thing being stolen in this house was his own certainty. As Woo-Jin discovers Zuri's integrity, how will he handle Mio and his men who are still convinced of her guilt? Woo-Jin strode back into the sunroom, his presence a cold front that sent Mio and the guards retreating into the hallway. He didn't offer an apology for the false accusation, nor did he look at the emerald ring now resting securely on his mother's finger. His mind was elsewhere, fixated on a detail he had caught in the peripheral of the surveillance feed just before he had exited the blue room. He had seen Zuri slide a manila folder into a hidden compartment of her nursing bag, a folder marked with a crimson stamp that read, "Confidential." The suspicion that had briefly softened during the incident with the ring hardened into a diamond-sharp resolve. He allowed the evening to settle into a deceptive calm, waiting until the clock struck midnight and Zuri had retreated to her quarters for her scheduled break. Moving with the silent, predatory efficiency that had made him the head of the Jang syndicate, Woo-Jin entered her room. The space was small and sparsely decorated, smelling faintly of lavender and the shea butter Zuri used on her skin. He felt a momentary pang of intrusion, but he suppressed it, reaching into the side pocket of her dark navy bag. His fingers curled around the rough texture of the folder. As he pulled it out, the confidential label stared back at him like an admission of guilt. "Finally," he whispered to the empty room, his jaw tightening. He was certain this was it. The bank account numbers, the layout of his security perimeter, or perhaps a list of his political contacts. He imagined her sitting here, late at night, documenting the weaknesses of his empire while his mother slept. The thought that her kindness had been a mask for such calculated betrayal made his blood run cold. He didn't open it there. He returned to the blue room, wanting to dissect her treachery under the surgical glow of his monitors. He slammed the folder onto his desk, his hand hovering over the edge of the paper. On the screen, the night vision camera showed Zuri sitting in the kitchen, staring at a photo of an elderly man, her father, with an expression of such profound exhaustion that it almost gave him pause. But Woo-Jin knew better than to trust a face. He flipped the cover open, his eyes scanning for codes or coordinates. Instead, his gaze fell upon a series of hand-drawn diagrams. They weren't of his mansion. They were intricate sketches of the human vocal cords and the neural pathways of the brain's Broca's area. Below the drawings in neat, cramped handwriting were daily logs that had nothing to do with his business. Tuesday, slight flick of the left vocal fold during humming exercises. Wednesday, pupil dilation increased when playing traditional Pansari music. Friday, resistance in the jaw is fatting. I believe she is trying to form the O sound. Woo-Jin's breath hitched. He turned the page, finding a printed research paper from a neurological institute in Switzerland, heavily annotated with Zuri's notes. At the top of the page, she had written a single sentence that shattered his world. "If we can bypass the scar tissue, soon he will speak by autumn." He sat back, the ledger of lies trembling in his hand. It wasn't a record of his secrets. It was a roadmap for his mother's soul. He had been looking for a spy, but he had found a woman who was fighting a war he had long ago surrendered. The silence of the blue room had never felt more suffocating. Woo-Jin sat motionless, The confidential folder still spread open across his lap like a map of a territory he had never dared to explore. His eyes were fixed on the sunroom monitor, where the early morning light was beginning to filter through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the dust motes into dancing shards of gold. Zuri was there, as she always was. She had pulled her chair close to Soon-hee's wheelchair, their knees almost touching. The nurse's deep brown skin was luminous in the dawn, her expression one of intense, quiet concentration. She wasn't holding a tray or a needle. She was holding a small, polished silver mirror in front of Soon-hee's face. "Look at me, Mama," Zuri whispered, the audio feed capturing the soft, rhythmic lilt of her voice. "Watch my lips. Feel the air in the back of your throat. Don't think about the words, just think about the breath." Woo-Jin leaned forward, his hand over his mouth, his own breath hitching. He had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the world's leading neurologists, all of whom had looked at his mother's scans and delivered the same sterile verdict. Permanent, irreversible, total. Yet here was this woman, a stranger from a world away, leaning into the silence with a stubborn, quiet hope that felt like a challenge to his every cynical belief. Zuri began to hum, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to pulse through the speaker system. She took Soon-hee's hand and placed it firmly against her own throat, then moved it to Soon-hee's. "Together," Zuri urged. "1, 2. For a long, agonizing minute, there was nothing but the hum of the air conditioning. Then, a sound broke through. It wasn't a word. It was a jagged, gravelly friction of air, a low ooh that cracked against the silence of the room. It was the sound of a rusted gate swinging open after a decade of winter. Soon-hee's eyes, usually so distant, suddenly flooded with a terrifyingly bright clarity. Her chest heaved, and the sound came again, stronger this time, vibrating with the raw effort of a soul trying to break surface. On the screen, Zuri's reaction was instantaneous. Her professional mask didn't just slip, it shattered. A radiant, toothy smile broke across her face, and she let out a short, breathless laugh that ended in a sob of pure, unadulterated triumph. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look for approval. She simply threw her arms around the elderly woman, pressing her cheek to Soon-hee's gray hair. "You did it," Zuri cried, her voice thick with tears. "I knew you were in there. I knew you could hear me." Watching the monitor, Woo-Jin felt a single, hot tear track down his fair cheek. He saw Zuri rocking his mother back and forth, her joy so visceral and unguarded that the idea of her being a spy felt like a sickness in his mind. He had been watching for a betrayal, but he had just witnessed a resurrection. And for the first time in his life, the most powerful man in Seoul felt completely and utterly small. The shadows in the hallway felt like physical weight as Woo-Jin moved toward the east wing. Every internal alarm he possessed was screaming that he was crossing a line he could never uncross, yet the need for absolute certainty drove him forward. He waited until the house settled into that peculiar, heavy silence that only exists at 3:00 a.m., then used his master key to slip into Zuri's quarters. The room was neat, smelling of the same calming lavender he had noticed before, but it felt strikingly small for a woman of her spirit. He went straight for the nursing bag, his pulse thrumming in his throat. He pulled out the folder, the crimson, confidential stamp mocking his paranoia in the dim moonlight. He didn't wait to return to the blue room this time. He sat on the edge of her small bed, his fingers trembling as he flipped the cover. He expected maps. He expected ledger entries of his own shipments or names of his undercover associates. Instead, the first page was a medical diagram of the human brain, hand-annotated in Zuri's elegant, slanted script. His eyes scanned the margins. "Patience is the only medicine the specialists forgot," she had written next to a sketch of the larynx. As he turned the pages, the magnitude of his mistake crashed down on him. This wasn't a dossier for a rival gang. It was a revolutionary, self-authored speech therapy regimen tailored specifically for his mother's unique trauma. Zuri had documented every flicker of Soon-hee's eyelids, every minute muscle twitch in her jaw, and every tonal shift in her breathing. She had been cross-referencing traditional Korean vocal exercises with cutting-edge neuroplasticity research from the West. The final page contained a personal note, one that made the air leave Woo-Jin's lungs. "Goal, Autumn. If she can say his name, maybe he will start living again. He looks at her like she's a ghost, but I see the queen. I have to bring her back for both their sakes. Woo-Jin closed the folder, the weight of it suddenly feeling like lead. He had spent 6 weeks watching her through a lens of suspicion, waiting for her to fail, while she had spent every waking hour trying to heal the hole in his heart. He looked around the room, at the photo of her own sick father at the cheap, worn shoes tucked neatly under the chair, and realized he had been the villain in his own house. He wasn't a protector. He was a jailer watching a saint. He stood up, his fair skin pale in the moonlight, a single tear finally breaking and tracing the sharp line of his jaw. He had found the confidential truth, and it was the one thing he was completely unprepared for. He was the one who had been blind. The revelation of Zuri's devotion still burned in Woo-Jin's mind, but the warmth was abruptly extinguished by a frantic vibration from the encrypted phone in his pocket. He stepped into the corridor, the confidential file still gripped in his hand, as the voice of his head of security crackled through the line. "Boss, we have a problem. The transport vehicle used for the nurse's weekly supply run was tagged. 2 unmarked black SUVs have been tailing the route for the last 10 minutes. They aren't local police. It's the Bakdu syndicate." Woo-Jin's blood turned to ice. The Bakdu were scavengers, a rival group that specialized in hitting a man where he was softest. For weeks, Woo-Jin had been so obsessed with watching Zuri for betrayal that he had intentionally kept her outside his inner circle of protection. He had denied her the elite security detail that followed Mio or himself, viewing her as a potential threat to be isolated rather than a person to be guarded. By keeping her at arm's length, he had inadvertently painted a target on her back. To the Bakdu, she wasn't just a nurse. She was the most vulnerable asset in the Jang mansion. He sprinted toward the blue room, his formal suit jacket fluttering behind him. He slammed his palm against the console, bringing up the city's traffic grid. The GPS on Zuri's transport blinked a steady, rhythmic red. She was currently caught in the bottleneck of the Mapo Bridge, a sitting duck in the middle of Seoul's morning rush. On the screen, he saw the grainy long-range feed from a street-level camera. The 2 black SUVs were closing the gap, weaving through traffic with a lethal, coordinated precision. They didn't want to kill her. They wanted a hostage, a way to force the iron boss of the Jang syndicate to his knees. "Intercept them," Woo-Jin roared into his headset, his voice cracking with a raw, jagged desperation he hadn't felt in years. "I don't care about the noise. If a single hair on her head is touched, I will burn the Bakdu to the ground." He watched the monitors, his hand covering his mouth as a familiar wave of shock and guilt washed over him. Through the camera lens, he could see the back of Zuri's head through the sedan's window. She was looking at her phone, likely checking on her father's medical status, completely unaware that the war he had brought her into was about to crash through the glass. He had spent so long watching her for a slip-up that he had failed to see the danger he had invited into her life. He wasn't just a jailer anymore. He was the reason her life was hanging by a thread. "Drive," he whispered at the screen, his fair skin pale under the cool blue light. "Zuri, please, drive." The scent of gunpowder and scorched asphalt still clung to Woo-Jin's suit as he entered the sunroom. The intercept had been narrow, a chaotic blur of sirens and screeching tires that had left Zuri shaken, but unharmed. She sat now by Soon-hee's side, her fingers trembling slightly as she smoothed the plaid blanket over the elderly woman's lap. When she looked up and saw Woo-Jin, her eyes weren't filled with the relief of a rescued victim, but with the sharp, piercing intelligence of a woman who finally saw the strings. "They weren't after the car, Mr. Jang," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. "They were after me because of you." Woo-Jin didn't flinch. He walked to the center of the room, the confidential file still in his hand, and placed it on the table between them. The silence that followed was heavy, a bridge of glass between 2 worlds. "I have watched you, Zuri," he began, his voice a low, gravelly confession. "Not just today, every night, every hour. I watched you through the pinhole cameras in this ceiling. I watched you find the ring. I watched you hum to a woman the world called a ghost. I even went into your room and took this." He gestured to the folder. Zuri stood up, her deep brown skin flushing with a mixture of violation and fury. "You spied on me. You treated me like a criminal while I was trying to save your mother's life." "I did," he admitted, stepping into the warm amber light of her space. "I was a man who believed trust was a weakness, but the backdo syndicate now knows you are the only person who can reach the heart of this family. Today was a warning. As long as you are the Maid, you are a target I cannot legally protect with the full might of my organization." He reached out, not to touch her, but to indicate the document. "You want to save my mother, you want to save your father, but you cannot do either if you are a hostage or a memory." Woo-Jin took a final step forward, his sharp features softening into a look of raw, desperate sincerity. "I am offering you a blood oath, a marriage of convenience, not for love, not yet, but for ironclad protection. As a Jang, you will be untouchable. My security will be your shadow, and your father's debts will vanish before the sun sets. In exchange, you stay, you finish what you started, you bring my mother back." Zuri looked from the powerful man in the expensive suit to the fragile woman in the wheelchair. She saw the iron he offered to shield her, and the silk of the life she was weaving back together for Soon-hee. The air in the sunroom felt charged, the beginning of a pact that would rewrite both their destinies. "A blood oath," she whispered, her gaze meeting his with a fire that matched his own. Woo-Jin nodded, a single sharp movement. "One name, one family, forever."